All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday from 10 p.m. Eastern until midnight, right here on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, and streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. My guest this hour, X Zone Nation, is Paige, and we're going to be talking to Katie about ufology and the High Strangeness Rocky Mountain Ranch. And joining me now from Colorado, somewhere way in the Rockies, is Paige. And Katie, welcome to the X Zone.
Oh, thank you, Rob. Thank you for having me on.
Katie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I mean, I hate to age myself here, but I had some unusual experiences back in the mid to late 70s on this ranch in Colorado, in Elbert County, Colorado. And like so many of us, I was a young girl at the time, and these things happened to me, and you continue on with life. So, got my degree, raised a family, all these things, but these things went unanswered in my life. And in 2012, I kind of opened a Pandora's box and started investigating what was happening out there. And I've been doing that ever since. So it's just this never-ending journey of questions, and I'm trying to seek answers for.
What is the High Strangeness Ranch in Colorado? We've never heard about this before.
Right. Well, yeah, what's really fascinating about it for me, my older sister and I, and my mom and the family that spent time and lived on this ranch in Elbert County, Colorado, I never knew it was ever investigated. So, I knew all these strange things happened. And I don't know if you've heard of Linda Moulton Howe.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah. So she got her start out here in Elbert County, Colorado during these cattle mutilations in 1975 through 1978. We had hundreds of them out here. So we had everything from strange humming sounds, cattle mutilations, strange circles on the grounds, blacked out helicopters that were menacing people, Sasquatch, crypto creatures, paranormal activities, you name it, it was happening. But we never knew it was ever investigated or that anybody knew anything about it. So back in 2012, I learned about the Mutual UFO Network, which is MUFON, and I just joined MUFON to become an investigator to learn about these things. And in 2013, I purchased a book by George Knapp and Colm Kelleher called Hunt for the Skinwalker. And in that book, there's a chapter called Other Hotspots, and they start talking about a ranch in Colorado. And I knew, even though the names were changed, they were very close to the original names. And I knew, and in that book, it referenced three PhDs that were investigating the property. Dr. Leo Sprinkle, PhD out of Laramie, Wyoming, who was a pioneer really in the field of hypnosis and also past life regression and things like that. And then they had John Durr, PhD. He was a seismologist, and Peter Van Arsdale. And so I promptly wrote Dr. Sprinkle a letter, and he confirmed that, yes, this is the ranch of my childhood. And I quickly made the 2.5-hour journey over to Laramie to the Heritage Center there, where all his archives are researched and were housed, and started getting all the original documents. And that's when I learned that this property was investigated by APRO, the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization, which kind of predates MUFON. And so APRO investigated this ranch way back in the day, and it's just been, uncovering documents and interviewing people and researching that ever since. So,
Katie, what kind of strangeness goes on there? You mentioned cattle mutilation.
I mentioned the cattle mutilation, and that was the biggest. And it wasn't just cows, but, horse, sheep, even dog. I promptly learned through the archives and the research that the Colorado Bureau of Investigations was well aware of what was happening, and the governor at the time was well aware of these mutilations because people were really frightened, and ranchers were starting to arm themselves, and they wanted answers to what
Yeah.
was going on. But like I mentioned, there was strange noises and blacked out helicopters, and definitely a military presence out there that I learned about, and mysterious metal. So I flew out. The undersheriff at the time, Bill Waugh, who has since passed away, his family lives in Florida now, but I flew out there to interview his son and his widow, and she pulled out just a whole big thing of old newspaper articles, and I learned so much about what was going on there through these newspaper articles. But there was mysterious blankets of metal found out there, like I mentioned, these blacked out helicopters. Learned of 2 A-7D helicopters that crashed, and we can get into that here in a little bit. I found some interesting things about that just recently, but just a whole, if you've heard of the Skinwalker Ranch, it pretty much mirrors everything that was happening out there, even Bigfoot sightings out there at the time.
Katie, is there any direct correlation between the Strangeness Ranch in Colorado and the Skinwalker Ranch? Are they on any ley lines? Is there any electromagnetic grid that they both fall on, or is it this strictly a coincidence?
No, for sure. There's definitely links there, and that's something that I've really been interested in because there's so many of these high strangeness ranches. You mentioned Skinwalker Ranch. There's Blind Frog Ranch. We have in Sedona the Bradshaw Ranch and Marley Woods in Missouri. Colorado Ranch. And one thing these properties all have in common, they ping the charts as being really highly magnetic. So you can go to the geological map of the country and see the magnetism zones, and they all ping the charts there. The vast majority of them all have aquifers underneath, and they all have similar geological properties as well. So I find that really interesting. And like Skinwalker Ranch and Bradshaw Ranch and the Colorado Ranch were all at high altitudes.
Right.
And we have this interesting Bob Bigelow connection, Bob Bigelow, Mount Wilson Ranch, also in Nevada, which I just got back from a trip actually last night. I got to visit Mount Wilson Ranch, and I got to meet the owner, Jeff, there. Wonderful people. But Bob Bigelow owned both Mount Wilson Ranch and Skinwalker Ranch at the same time, and they were doing, NIDS was investigating out there. And the Colorado Ranch out here in Elbert County kind of predates all those ranches almost by a decade. And I really believe that the phenomenon kind of almost started here in Elbert County, Colorado, and then all these other strange places kind of made their way onto the map as well. So they're linked in some mysterious way for sure.
Katie, is there any military base near this ranch?
Well, in Colorado Springs, we have the Air Force Academy, of course. We have Camp Carson. We have Butte, which houses, the helicopters there. We have Peterson Air Force Base. And, of course, we have NORAD, Cheyenne Mountain NORAD. So, yeah, it's a heavily military base out there in Colorado Springs. And the Elbert County Ranch, especially in the mid to late 70s, the property Air Force owned almost backed up to the property out there. So one thing I found fascinating in Dr. Leo Sprinkle's files were some handwritten notes, and basically says that there was a gentleman named Warren, and his last name was redacted out, from Camp Carson. He was visiting the ranch, which is also interesting. I'm like, why were there soldiers there from Camp Carson? But he felt something wrong. He wouldn't walk into the woods. He said something took over his mind and made him walk towards the woods, and then it would release him. He would run back to the ranch house, and this did this to him 5 times. So that's really interesting. And then there was another handwritten note that said, Bill Waugh, the undersheriff, he wanted to talk to someone, has seen ships go into the ground, boxes, mutilations being done. Nobody will talk. He doesn't want an investigation, the publicity or any stigma, because credentials were a big important factor for him. He said that a NORAD colonel said bluntly to forget about it and to shut up, and an Air Force head has a directive to handle UFOs and Bigfoot. So I'm like, holy smokes, yeah.
I've never heard of anyone in the military, having a directive when it comes to Bigfoot. UFOs, yes, but Bigfoot, never before. Isn't this very strange?
Yeah, it's really interesting. one of the most compelling things that I just recently kind of made the connection on. So John Schuessler, who is one of the founding fathers of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, and before MUFON, he was with APRO. And so he was one of the main investigators looking into this High Strangeness Ranch in Colorado back in the day. And when he learned of my personal connection to the ranch, he bestowed upon me the original briefing document, which is quite lengthy. And in that briefing document, it talked about 2 interceptors that were in pursuit of a UFO that were scrambled out of Buckley Air Force Base. And so I thought, well, certainly there must be something, but these interceptors crashed. So this happened on November 11th, 1975. 2 A-7D interceptors were scrambled out of Buckley Air Force Base, and I FOIA'd Kirkland Air Force Base, and I got a big old thick packet back. What's fascinating about the FOIA report that I got back, it states in there that the Red Eye 32 instructor noted that his cockpit instrument lights were inoperative, along with his airspeed, vertical velocity, radar altimeter, clock, oil, and fuel quantity flow, and outlet temperatures. So he illuminated these instruments through his cockpit utility lights. Also, I learned that they had 218 live rounds of ammunition on board, and what was reported as one of the causes of the accident is that the instructor misidentified the rotating beacon light of another aircraft, which was never identified. They never said what other aircraft was in the vicinity, and that the instructor hit the tail of the pilot. Both pilots ejected, both pilots survived. But what's really interesting, I visited outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. There's the National UFO Historical Record Center that's headed by David Marler, who is a good friend of mine. And I like going there to do research because I believe history and records and that are extremely important. And I find this report, and it talks about on November 11th, 1975. So the exact same day, the exact same year as the 2 A-7Ds crashed in Elbert County, we had the Canadian Air Force out of Falconbridge, Ontario. They're watching several objects on radar. This object goes from 26,000 feet, shoots straight up to 74,000 feet, and they're watching this for several hours. So they decide it's going 25 to 30 nautical miles south. So they decide to scramble 106.
Katie, we're just going to have a bit of a cliffhanger here. I have to take a break at this point. Exonation, Katie Paige is our special guest. Her website is katiepaige.net, KatiePaige.net. And Katie and I will be back on the other side of this short break as the X Zone continues with yours truly from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, streamed around the world on classic1220.ca. Whatever you do, don't go away. We'll be right back after this short break.
Tracker. Tom was a man with dreams, and Ernie came along and I wrote the songs about a creature that few's ever seen. Monsters, myths, and mysteries, legend tales and
Katie Paige is my special guest this hour, Exonation, and this is the X Zone on your hometown radio, Classic 1220, streamed at classic1220.ca. Katie, continue your story, please, about, we're going back to November the 11th, 1975, when all this is happening, right?
Right. So, so like I said, there were 2 107s that were in pursuit of an unknown anomalous object in Elbert County, Colorado. And at that same time, out of Falconbridge, Ontario, they scrambled, they actually ended up scrambling them from Selfridge, Michigan, out of the Air Force Base there, 2 F-106 Delta Darts. And they actually, this is the first time the United States Air Force admitted scrambling jets to intercept a UFO. It made the front page of the National Enquirer. So it was really cool to get those documents from David Marler's Records Center out there. And to make that connection, that on that particular day, same year, 4 jets were scrambled after something. So, wow, right?
Exactly. Now, here's a question for you, Katie. November the 11th, 1975, 6 days after Travis Walton was abducted.
Right.
Any connection?
That's another connection. Yeah. I mean, I love to research the 70s when it comes to ufology.
Yeah.
It's so hard now as an investigator. I just recently stepped down. I was a state director for Colorado MUFON for 3.5 years. But it's, it's a lot of work to do that. It's a great chapter out here, and I love the people, but I just have been so busy with the research and that I walked away from that position, but I'm still an investigator. And as a lot of people know out there, with the internet and cell phones and AI technology and that, it's just much more difficult to investigate these things than it was in the 70s. So there's so many great encounters and events that took place then. So yeah, the connection there, Travis Walton. I know Travis Walton. We've talked a lot about that and these blue lights. Who knows if all these things are connected, but it's certainly a compelling time, to say the least.
Yeah. You mentioned that one of the aircraft or one of the interceptors saw a red beacon, a rotating red beacon, and I've never heard of a UFO before having a red rotating beacon.
No, that was there were 2 jets scrambled, so the instructor pilot misidentified the beacon or a light of another aircraft. He didn't really say it was a red beacon, just another light. So that's what was in the report that I got back, that he misidentified a light, but he didn't say the color of the light.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood that.
Yeah, they never identified what the other aircraft was, which is a little suspicious, So yeah, I'm always like, if those pilots are out there somewhere, please contact me. You can go to my website. I would love to be able to talk to these pilots because, thankfully they did eject and they thankfully survived. But it's really interesting.
On the day that Travis Walton was abducted, which is going back to November 5th, 1975, there were many strange things happening over the Great Lakes of North America. There were interceptors dispatched from Ontario. I believe it was Falconbridge on that date that actually went out over Lake Superior to vector in on targets using radar, and the targets just vanished. Then there was another incident, seemed like no time later, where these UFOs tracked over the Niagara River between Lake Erie to Lake Ontario. So what was happening back then? Now, is it possible that these UFOs were military targets? Is it possible, especially now with what we're learning about the Chinese and their balloons that are doing surveillance on the United States and Canada, is it possible that there's an underlying connection here that the military doesn't want us to know, not because it has anything to do with extraterrestrials, but their own military mission and trainings that are going on?
Well, of course. And I just think logic will tell us that. And, I'm sure that the military is keeping an eye on, UFO reports that are coming in, because they want to know what people are reporting, what they're seeing. If it is our own secret technology, I believe we need to have that and keep that secret.
Sure.
So, of course, they're going to want to know what people are seeing, what people are reporting, and how they're describing it. And I think that helps, in what they're doing. So that does make a lot of sense. And I know the sighting there out of Falconbridge, that we had several civilians on the ground, both military and regular civilians. And I think there was reported that 7 police officers observed not only one, but several objects that were unidentified at that time for several hours. So finally they did scramble those 2 Delta darts after those. So yeah, I don't know. To me, if it was something of our own, I don't know if they would have, admitted to doing that. But then again, is this a disinformation where they want us all to believe these are UFOs when it's our own technology? So that certainly, could be the case.
What do you make of cattle mutilations? Who do you think are doing the cattle mutilations, and why?
Yeah, I mean, this has been going on now for decades and decades. And just, this recently, I was honored to be a part of the History Channel series Beyond Skinwalker. So they were out there investigating the Rocky Mountain Ranch, and we just got done filming 2 more episodes for season 2. And that's been a really cool adventure for me because it's been the first time I've been back on the ranch since I was a young girl, and getting to know the locals, and interviewing these people that have been there for decades, and come to find out, I mean, they just had a recent mutilation as early as last August. So it's still happening, not to the degree it was back in the mid to late 70s, but it's still a phenomenon that is occurring. What I think is going on now, I'm not a cattle mutilation expert. I leave that to the likes of Christopher O'Brien and Chuck Zukowski and Linda Howe. They've been at this for quite some time, and I really respect their work. However, I get out there and I have interviewed a few people in the area of Elbert County that experience these mutilations. And one interview I did in particular was fascinating. And this happened in 1978, 79. She said her and her husband owned a lot of property out in Rama, Colorado. And her husband was on horseback checking the cows for calves. And he came across a dead calf. And this calf had perfect square incision, just 4 cuts. And the top of the fur was removed, but the skin was still there. So he gets on his horse, goes back and gets my witness. They come back in the pickup truck, which she said took 20, 25 minutes. By the time they got back, that calf had been completely mutilated, cauterized incision, blood drained, organs removed. Only tracks around the animal were the horse tracks that her husband had left there earlier. They were miles off the county road. She said it was eerie. She said they felt like they were being watched, scared them to death. And to me, that's a really compelling case. It's as if he came upon this calf with a mutilation in progress. No helicopter sounds, no nothing. So I know there's those that believe, this is perhaps our own military checking cattle for, different diseases or groundwater or whatever, but there's too many strange cases of cattle. It's almost like as if they're being dropped, no blood. Other animals won't approach these mutilated animals, and she had the photographs of that calf that she sent me via Facebook Messenger. And she had photos too. It's kind of graphic, but she's like, this is what it looks like when, a coyote attacks a calf. It's much different. They just tear at the animal. It's not cauterized and blood drain and all that kind of stuff. So what's fascinating is still going on to this day, and I'm not so sure what that's about. But the Midwest was certainly hit extremely hard, all from Montana to Wyoming, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma. That Colorado was hit the hardest, so for sure.
Why would the military have to play this cloak and dagger if they wanted to check out cattle? That makes no sense.
Exactly. That's how I've always felt. And I also felt like we do have documents that show that we had, people or soldiers from Camp Carson on the ranch property, as well as the Air Force. And my question was always, that property sat vacant for 10 to 12 years before, the family bought it. And if they wanted to do experiments out there or test cattle or whatever, they could have just purchased the land. So that's always been a big question mark for me. It just doesn't make sense that they would go about it in this way.
A lot of things within the realm of the ufology makes no sense to people. Why do you think that the government is suppressing information, or as Steve Bassett likes to say, continuing a truth embargo?
Right. I mean, there's a few different theories on that, and I think the most popular one, of course, is this false flag, alien invasion kind of thing. And it's also a distraction. I was speaking at a conference in Laughlin a few years back, and you know who Richard Doty is, the disinformation officer who's kind of come forward lately and is like, hey, I'm ready to tell the truth now. But but I was curious when I talked to Richard Doty, I was curious if he was aware of the Elbert County Ranch property back in the day. And I was surprised to find that he was aware of it. I asked him point blank, I'm like, what's with the helicopters. There were several newspaper articles talking about these mysterious helicopters that were like menacing and chasing young people. And I'm like, why would they do that? What's going on? And he said, a distraction. I want you to believe it's this, or look over here, why we're doing these black access projects over there. So I do think it's a diversion of hiding some truths.
If this is happening to people, and you have the military who are just bamboozling them for one reason or another, why wouldn't another federal agency like the FBI get involved? Because doing what the military is doing to civilians in order to hide whatever it is they're doing, isn't that against the law? Does the military actually have that much power? And why can't other federal agencies like the FBI do something about it?
Right. And I think that's like a crossroads we're at now with, having whistleblower protection and that. And I'm hoping some of these secrets eventually see the light of day. But I've always felt, and in my case personally, I mean, if they are affecting people, myself including, and others that have, been harmed or tested or whatever, that there's a huge liability issue. They don't want this to ever see the light of day. And that's part of why it won't come out, because it was even in the congressional hearings that people
Katie,
have been
we've got to do it to you again. We've got to do another. Okay, we've got to do another break. When we come back, I want to talk about the congressional hearings because I've got a lot of questions to ask. X-Zone Nation, Katie Paige is our special guest. KatiePaige.net is her website. And this is the X-Zone, and you're listening to us around the world on Classic 1220 and streaming at classic1220.ca. We'll be back on the other side of this break.
Monsters, myths, and mysteries, legend, tales, and facts. It brought us all together, and it's a reason for the fact. Up in North California, where the redwoods reach the skies, 3 men with a gold and a pack that they'd hold in a... What's it take to be a believer? Tell me who's to say. You think that we'd have come this far, looking back on yesterday?
Katie Paige is our guest. KatiePaige.net is her website. And Katie, what did you take away from the recent congressional hearings?
Well, I'm sitting here looking at decades and decades worth of magazines and books, and this isn't our first time around doing this, where we feel like we're making some progress, and then, it's that old adage, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So it can get a little frustrating. It was extremely frustrating to me to see the lack of knowledge on the history of ufology in general. And I also find it frustrating that we have people, men and women, very credible, that are brave enough to come forward, and they're trying to share their truths with all of us. And then, they're trying to discredit and tear them down. And I think they're doing that in an attempt so other whistleblowers won't come forward, because this is what happens to somebody who wants to come and speak their truth. They're going to dig in their background and expose their dirty laundry to the world. And so it's a nasty game.
What a lot of people that I've had the opportunity of speaking to were complaining about is that the hype was there. Excuse me. The witnesses were there. But nothing was revealed to the public. Everything was, well, we'll have to talk in private, not in public. Well, what did you have the congressional hearing for if everything was going to be talked in back rooms? It made no sense to a lot of people.
Right. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And, we have people that, they can go to jail if they're disclosing things that they're not able to disclose. And I guess for me, I feel like, well, at least they're having the conversation. I mean, I guess that's a good step in the right direction.
It's a start, yeah.
You're right. And I think, the world's different now. We have hundreds and hundreds of podcasts out there and social media and people really pushing, and this younger generation coming forward, and they know more than we did, but, for me, it's almost like you have to go through all these books and magazines and try to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And now it's like at our fingertips. So I'm hoping that they just get more and more public pushback to know the secrets. And I'm saying that because I think now it's kind of common knowledge that, hey, we're not going to find answers by necessarily sending FOIA requests to our military, because a lot of this information and secrets and back engineering, meta materials from downed craft, it's put in, Lockheed and General Electric and Intel and all these places where we can't send FOIA requests. It's protected,
But how do we know for a fact, Katie, that there is downed craft and that there is reverse engineering? It's a great theory, but when it comes to fact, is there any?
Right. A lot of anecdotal evidence, right? And I, for one, I'm a researcher. I love my facts, and, I like documents and things like that. And, people always laugh at me because it's like, do you believe that, do you believe in UFOs? Do you believe in aliens? Do you think they made it to the Earth? And sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. But I'll tell you, every time I go visit, the archives centers, and I went to David Marler's, I don't know, I guess it was last year, and sitting on his table there were 2 big boxes of strictly military pilot and, civilian pilot reports. And when you see the amount of those reports from very credible people, I'm like, okay, this can't all be our own stuff. Like, there's something going on here. So me personally, I believe, yes, we at the very least have downed craft that has been studied, and we're possibly trying to reverse engineer it and have been for decades, since 1947 Roswell.
But once again, it's hypothetical because there is no evidence to substantiate these claims.
Yeah, just a lot of witnesses, a lot of blurry pictures, just like Bigfoot. Interestingly enough, speaking of the Roswell case, a few years back, I had an interesting case come across my desk. General Arthur Exxon, it was rumored that one of the Roswell bodies made it to a mortuary outfit in Denver. And so I've been researching this angle of that part of the investigation for quite some time now. And it's interesting because there's an Eisenhower connection. Mamie Eisenhower is from Denver. And there's a Fitzsimmons-Lowry connection, and the mortician gave his testimony about what he witnessed. And so, this is unfolding, and I'm hoping to learn more. I've been down to the Eisenhower archives pulling some documents, some theories I'm following, which I'm hoping to share as I get more and more evidence on that. So the more I look at those types of documents, the more I'm like, yeah, I do believe something happened. Also, there's so many interesting people within ufology in general that are trying to steer a narrative, so to speak. And I'm thinking they're doing that for, like what we talked about earlier, 1 or 2 reasons: to steer us to make believe it's UFOs and aliens when it's all our own stuff, or they're actually interested and there's something that they're keeping an eye on that they don't want exposed. So
excuse me, I'm just getting over one heck of a cold here. Is it possible that the ufologists, the organizations like MUFON and the other independent organizations that are out there, are actually doing more harm than good when it comes to actually finding out what the issues are?
Well, I hope case. I mean, there needs to be an outlet, and I think that MUFON has done a good job with that, having a place where just, a civilian can see something they don't understand in the sky. Right. 90% of the time we could tell you it's Starlink or a bug or a bird or an airplane or whatever, but there needs to be some place that people can go to report these things. So I think it serves a purpose, and I think they do a great job in training their field investigators. A lot of what we do, is Flight Radar 24 and Stellarium. I kind of giggled when I first became an investigator years ago and thought, oh, there can't be that many people who misidentified the planet Venus as a UFO, but you'd be surprised. If you stare at a planet long enough, it's going to wiggle and appear to move. Well, yeah. So, yeah. But and MUFON also has the Experiencer group headed up by Kathleen Martin, who is the niece of Betty and Barney Hill, that famous abduction, So I think it's a great outlet for people to connect and try to solve this mystery that we're all trying to find answers to.
If this is a mystery, I'm not saying it's not. Please don't get me wrong. If
Right, right.
if this is a mystery, then why are there not more people working on it? Why are there not more scientists working on it? Why are there not more people with degrees working on it instead of the mom and dad, armchair quarterbacks that are out there trying to solve this mystery? Why don't they leave it to
Right.
the experts?
Right. I think we're seeing more and more of that. I mean, we have Gary Nolan out there, and other PhDs, many PhDs actually coming together. They're having their big contact in the desert event, and I know they're getting a lot of these PhDs and people who are really looking to find these answers on, they're all together working together. And even MUFON, they had their scientific board. So I agree. I hope more and more people who are way more intelligent than I am on this topic, and we're seeing that for sure.
What I was talking about the UFO groups, possibly doing more harm than good, is because if these sightings have anything to do with national security, and these groups bring attention to what the military is doing, I can then understand why the military is using tactics to dissuade people from putting their nose into matters that are national security. Like,
Well, for sure. And
yeah.
even at some of these ranches, we don't necessarily know what technologies they were playing around with there. I know there were different patents, and Kit Green and Hal Puthoff and Bob Bigelow and these players out there. We don't know what they were doing, and yes, I'm curious, but at the same time, I feel like if and when any investigators get too close to any truths they don't want to expose, you will be approached, So
Have you been approached?
I believe so, to a mild degree. At the very least, I know, especially with some of the Eisenhower stuff I was looking at, that, I'm curious about some individuals that have sort of been, I've been contacted. For example, when I put in the FOIA request for the two A-70s that crashed, I got a direct call from the head of FOIA for the Air Force, and he said, questioned me for like 20 minutes. Well, what do you want? Why do you want it? And if you want anything else from that area, please just contact me directly. So yeah, kind of things like that. So I'm like, so they're hiding something, and like I said before, I understand the need for that. Like, I don't, and again, like with the hearings, there's a need for closed door discussions for that very reason.
Then why have the hearings in public? Why not do it in another way instead of getting everybody's hopes built up, watching these hearings just to have people being ushered into back rooms, and really nothing was accomplished. In fact, after the hearings, nobody talks about them anymore.
Yeah, I think that's planned. I think there's a public push for this. It's a hot topic right now, in 2014 when we had, the gimbal and the go fast, and it sparked a huge interest, and they had to answer. And this was their way of doing that. And hence the 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. I think they're trying to satisfy to a degree, and then hopefully people forget and move on and talk about, other issues that are going on. There's big, huge worldly issues that,
Sure.
and that always kind of surprised me, because beginning of this, we have really like, oh my gosh, we might have this technology. We might be visited by other. At the end of the day, you still need to go to work and provide for your families, and and live life. So maybe it's some kind of testing the waters, so to speak, to see how we all react.
You raised a very important question here. Why do we need to know? If they're here, they're here. Why do we
maybe
need?
just to prepare mentally.
But
Maybe that's what it's about. Like, I've heard rumors that in a couple of years, maybe our visitors will come down and say, hey, who knows? And maybe that's what it is, just kind of preparing us through popular culture and movies, and they've been doing that. I mean, 1977, Close Encounters of the Third Kind and everything else. Maybe we were slowly getting
that's Hollywood.
acclimated
That's
to
Hollywood.
our visitors out in the universe. I don't know.
All right, you and I have to take our final break. Please stand by. And Exo Nation, Katie Paige is our guest. www.katiepage.net, and we'll both be back as we wrap up this first hour of tonight's show here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us on the X Zone Broadcast Network and on Classic 1220, www.classic1220.ca.
Tell me who's to say you think that we'd have come this far, looking back on yesterday, because you hadn't seen sun.
And welcome back to the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. Katie Paige is our special guest. www.katiepage.net. First of all, Katie, thanks very much for coming on. Very interesting conversation. And High Strangeness Ranch. Wow. Not only UFOs, not only cattle mutilation, but also Bigfoot sightings.
That's right. And,
Wow.
and it's interesting because that area, it's, we have patches of ponderosa pines, but it's not like up here in the Rocky Mountains where it's very mountainous. It's kind of flat ranch land, out there with these patches of ponderosa pines. But there were several very credible reports of Sasquatch sightings out there. In fact, one of the cool things that happened that first night of filming for Beyond Skinwalker, it's episode 3 of season 1, is the Rocky Mountain Ranch episode. We had this crazy blizzard just kind of roll in. We were expecting snow, but not that much of a whiteout blizzard. We could see our hair's getting frozen and we're freezing cold out there. But I go back to back in the day when I was young, they had these strange boxes that would make these sounds, like a bee sound, hum sounds. And these boxes, and even the undersheriff witnessed these boxes, they would be there 1 minute and disappear. So I witnessed one of those along with the people on the ranch and sheriffs and other adults, many witnesses to these strange boxes. And come to find out they've seen them even in the UK. And Skinwalker Ranch and other locations have these strange, weird boxes. I'm not sure what they are, if they're ours or something else. But nonetheless, was taking the film crew back where I had witnessed this, and it was at night. It was freezing cold, snowing, and there in the snow, there's this blanket of snow, and out of nowhere come these big, huge bipedal tracks that went on for like 10, 12 feet, then disappeared for another 10 feet, and then reappeared and then vanished. I mean, it wasn't a deer, it wasn't an elk, it wasn't a horse, it wasn't a cow. I don't know what it was. So I don't know. I mean, it was just wild to see that. So I don't know, again, I'm on the fence when it comes to that, but there's just so many reports of people seeing these creatures. I don't know what they're seeing, what they are, but there's certainly a lot of reports, and it was certainly mysterious to see those tracks.
Has the connection with Bigfoot and UFOs always been around, or is this something new that has just come into the UFO field?
No, it's been theorized for a long time. There's a wonderful book by Stan Gordon called Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO Bigfoot Casebook. So there's been this connection between possible Sasquatch and UFOs for quite some time. And I know some people out there have the theory maybe these are extraterrestrials themselves, intelligent Sasquatch. I mean, I don't know. But yeah, this theory has been around for decades, that possibly they're connected to craft.
Katie, in your opinion, having done so much great research over the years, do you think that the human race is in any danger because of these visitors?
I don't believe so personally, no. I just don't believe that to be the case. If that were the case, what are they waiting for? I don't know. And I'm still like, I think a lot of this is our own technology. But I also believe that there's so many good cases out there that we just can't sweep it under the carpet and not take a look at it and not continue to research it. I think it's really important that we don't close our eyes to the possibility that we could have visitors, and maybe they've been here, millennia. Maybe they're under the oceans in caverns. That's another theory out there at some of these places, like the Colorado Ranch, is the tunneling underground. The hums and the bangs and the sounds going underground. Could they be tunneling out of NORAD, to different locations across the country? And is that what they're covering up? I don't know, but
it's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
If these visitors are friendly, why don't they just pop their craft, one on the White House lawn, one on Parliament Hill in Ottawa, one in front of Buckingham Palace, and every other major capital in the world, and say, "Ta-da, we're here."
Ta-da. Well, man, wouldn't that be something?
I think it'd be great.
Maybe they're afraid of us. I don't know. We don't do too well with unknown things, like
we don't even do well with ourselves.
We're shooting down balloons, for goodness sakes.
Well, it's not nice to spy on other countries, whether you're using balloons or satellite technology.
Right. So who knows what that answer is? And I always like to say, like, I always say, if somebody tells you they know the motives or where they're from or what they're doing, run, because I don't think anybody has those answers, really.
Run for the hills. Katie, do you think there will be any increased activity as the United States makes its way back to the moon?
Well, again, we can go into cover-ups with that. Even the Mars rovers and some of the images that are coming back from that are suspicious to me. It's like, what are we looking at right here? And who knows what they've been covering up and blurring out for a long time. So I don't think that's going to change much of anything, even, the Webb telescope and what we're seeing there. But I just recently saw an article, they're looking for certain signatures in the universe. So maybe, that's where we're going to find, like, hey, there's oxygen here. We know there's life out there in the universe. Now, again, that's going to leave the question whether they've made it to our planet. That leaves that question still open for debate.
And there's a lot of questions that are open for debate these days. With the U.S. presidential election coming this year, I believe. Am I right? There's a U.S. election this year, or is it next year? Wouldn't this be a great topic for either, President Biden or any of the runners on the Republican side to take a hold of the UFO question and one way or another give a definitive answer? Now, that brings up something else. If the president and everyone else concerned said, listen, I know there's plenty of theories out there. I know that there's a conspiracy theory out there, but there are no ETs. We are not suppressing any information. Would anybody believe them?
I don't think so. I mean, the presidency is a pretty temporary role in the big scheme of things. You're only there for 4 or 8 years. Perhaps they don't know. I think there's in history, there's been presidents who wanted to find answers, and I think they had their door slammed on them as well. So I'm one who believes that they don't have the answers. It's so compartmentalized. I don't think they all know what the answers are. So perhaps they're seeking answers just like the rest of us.
Now, if we have computer hackers that hack into public utilities, into different federal agencies, get all the names and addresses of employees as well as into some intelligence agencies, if hackers or if a country unfriendly to the United States and her allies wanted to make them look really stupid, wouldn't all they have to do is crack into a computer, find out everything on Roswell and on all the other UFO sightings, and do a WikiLeaks? But that hasn't happened.
No, it hasn't. That's a good point. I mean, I'm thinking maybe we'll get disclosure, if you want to call it disclosure, from another country, Brazil. They have incredible sightings. Maybe we'll hear some truths from that. I don't know. I think as some of these whistleblowers come forward, I think slowly but surely, I'm optimistic that we'll get more answers, at least in my lifetime, in the next 5-10 years.
But Katie, how can we trust whistleblowers? You have these people who take an oath of allegiance or an oath to secrecy,
Mm-hmm.
and then they break their oath. How can we trust anything they say? If they lied to the military, if they lied to the people to whom they've taken this oath, which is the United States of America, why would we believe that they're not lying to us?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I actually have lists of these folks that have those connections. But we also have whistleblowers that are working for aerospace companies and, General Electric and other companies like this.
Right.
As these folks come forward and tell us what they know, because they have nothing else to lose at this point, I would tend to put more weight into what they have to say, because they didn't have an oath that they're breaking.
We've talked to people who were CIA contractors who worked at Area 51, the Skunk Works. And unequivocally, they've gone on record saying there are no crashed UFOs. There is nothing to back engineering. There are no ETs that are being held. And these are people who've worked on the space programs, who've had total access to Area 51 and Skunk Works. So who do we believe? As somebody standing on the outside who doesn't have the ins that you have, or the people that I've talked to over the many years, they must be looking at this saying, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, for sure. And I've had the honor to speak to a few gentlemen who have told me the opposite. Like, I have worked on these things, and we're at least 30 years more advanced than the general public knows.
Sure.
So, it goes both ways. So, it comes down to, and I always say, it's always good to meet people one-on-one, face-to-face. It's hard to tell why people come forward or why they don't. We don't know what's going on, what threats they have, or what oaths they've taken. So you're right. That's a hard nut to crack.
I often think that there's a sign on the backside of the moon that why people don't want us to know what's theirs, because it's this big sign that says Earth ahead, turn around now. Right. Stay away. These folks are crazy. Yeah. They can't get along with themselves. How are they going to get along with anybody from another planet, another universe who's far more advanced than them? Katie, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I wish you continued success, and let our listeners know that, your website is, again, katiepage.net. Katie, thanks very much for joining us. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, thank you for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Nice talking to you, Katie. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now. X-Zone Nation, Katie Paige has been my guest this hour. And once again, her website is katiepage.net. Fascinating. There's a lot of questions out there, X-Zone Nation. There are so many people like me out there. I want to believe. I really do. But I want to see the proof. I want to see the facts. And they're out there. And it's because of people like Katie who are doing the door knocking and who are doing the research and who will not take no for an answer that someday we'll find the truth one way or another. I'll be back on the other side of this break as hour number 2 starts here in the X-Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on your hometown radio, Classic 220, 1220. Classic 220, oh, that's a shocking one. Classic 1220. And streaming on classic1220.ca.
Yesterday, because you hadn't seen sun, you tend to disbelieve.